A little girl stood beside a grave, overgrown with weeds, tears streaming down her face, whispering, "Mom is still alive." Everyone shook their heads, until a millionaire decided to dig it up, and when the coffin lid creaked open, the truth left the entire town in stunned silence. Late in the afternoon, the city buzzed with honking cars, and streetlights cast a dim glow over cracked sidewalks. Amid the crowd, a small girl with messy hair and a faded jacket bent down to pick discarded plastic bottles from a public trash can. Her name was Lucy Carter, 10 years old. No home, no family. She survived on leftovers and the loose change she got from recycling, and on one unshakable belief: her mother wasn't dead. Lucy made her way to the public cemetery on the southern edge of the city. She passed rows of cold, weathered gravestones and stopped at one old grave overgrown with weeds. The headstone read, "Eleanor Carter, 1988 to 2017. She pulled a bunch of dried wildflowers from her coat pocket, laid them on the grave, and sat down on the cold ground. "Mom, I came again," she whispered. Her voice was raspy, but her eyes were firm. "They say you're gone, but I don't believe it. I saw you in my dreams. You were crying. I feel like you're still out there, waiting for me." The wind rustled through the bare branches. Lucy gently touched the corner of an old frayed photograph. Her mother, Eleanor, a kind woman with soft brown hair and smiling eyes. She tucked the photo back into her pocket, stood up, and left the cemetery just as she had many times before. In her thin plastic bag was a tattered folder filled with old documents, faded photocopies, a death certificate, a blurred declaration of death, a few reports she had dug out of a hospital trash bin after weeks of searching. She didn't understand all the words, but something didn't feel right. Her mum couldn't have disappeared that easily. On her way back to the vacant lot where she slept, behind an abandoned bus stop, Lucy paused outside a bakery. Inside, people laughed and bought pastries. She didn't beg. She just stood there, watching, silent. Just then, a sleek black SUV pulled up across the street. The door opened, and a tall man stepped out. He wore a long coat, and his face, though stern, carried a trace of something weathered by life. His name was Nathaniel Thornton, 40 years old, a real estate millionaire, just leaving a partner meeting at a nearby office tower. As he exited the coffee shop, his eyes suddenly locked onto something. A small girl, thin, ragged, clutching a worn plastic bag, stood like a shadow outside the bakery window. For a moment, he froze. She looked exactly like his daughter, same age, who had died in an accident years ago. He remembered her standing by a bakery window, eyes lit with hope. His heart clenched, not out of pity, but because a memory had struck him with full force. Nathaniel crossed the street, walked up slowly, and crouched beside the girl. "Are you out here alone?" he asked gently. Lucy flinched, took a step back, gripping her coat tightly. The instinct of a child used to being chased away. "I'm not begging," she said firmly, voice small but steady. "I didn't think you were," Nathaniel replied, with a soft smile. "I just saw you holding a photo. Who's that?" Lucy hesitated, then pulled out the worn picture along with a few crumpled documents. She held them up. "This is my mom. They say she died, but I think she's still alive. I have proof. Or at least, I think I do." Nathaniel took the photo. His heart skipped. That face, those eyes. "Elena," he whispered. The woman in the picture was Elena Carter, his childhood neighbor, the girl he had silently admired for years. She had moved away long ago. They lost touch. And now, a child, bearing her last name, was standing in front of him, claiming her mother might still be alive. "What's your name?" Nathaniel asked, his voice slightly cracked. "Lucy," Lucy Carter. They looked at each other. No more words were needed. Something had awakened deep inside Nathaniel, something he thought he had buried. He crouched lower, looking her in the eye. "Are you hungry?" Lucy gave a small nod. "Then let's grab something to eat, and you can tell me about your mom." Under the soft orange glow of the streetlight, a man and a child stepped quietly into a roadside diner. It was the beginning of something much bigger, a journey to uncover a truth long buried. And in Nathaniel's mind, only one thought echoed. If that really is Elena, I can't walk away from this child, not for one more minute. The meeting between Nathaniel and Lucy may have seemed like chance, but in truth, it was the start of a path neither of them could turn back from. As Nathaniel listened to Lucy's firm yet innocent voice and stared into the past through her eyes, he knew. He had to find out the truth. They sat across from each other in the small diner. In front of Lucy was a warm sandwich, but she only tore off small pieces. It wasn't just shyness. It was as if she was saving her strength for a different kind of battle. A battle with memories, unclear and confusing. Nathaniel listened silently. Lucy told him about sneaking through hospital trash bins, the crumpled documents she had gathered, the dreams that kept repeating, her mother calling her name from the darkness. Each word from Lucy struck Nathaniel like a pin to the heart. This wasn't the fantasy of a lost child. She laid the folder on the table. Nathaniel opened it and read every page carefully. The inconsistencies were clear, especially on the death certificate, with mismatched dates. He said nothing at first, resting his hand on the papers, thinking deeply. Finally, he asked softly, "Do you have anywhere to sleep tonight?" Lucy shook her head. Nathaniel glanced around, then signaled the waiter for the check. Before they left, he crouched again, looked her in the eye and said, "You can stay at my place tonight. Tomorrow, we'll go through all this properly. If something doesn't add up, I promise I'll help you find the truth." Lucy didn't say anything. She just gave a small nod. She didn't know how much she could trust this man, but his eyes were different from those who had turned her away. And in that moment, between two strangers, a fragile thread of trust began to take hold. The next morning, Nathaniel sat in his private office on the top floor of the Thornton Realty building. Outside, the city was still wrapped in morning fog, but inside his mind, everything had begun to shift. On his desk lay the folder Lucy had given him, the one he had now reviewed for the 10th time. Under a magnifying glass, he studied every detail. No official red stamp, a blurred doctor's signature, and most concerning of all, the date of death certification was almost a week after the reported time of death. That wasn't a simple clerical mistake. At first, Nathaniel thought Lucy might just be clinging to a fantasy, a defense mechanism of a traumatized child. But now, he wasn't so sure. He picked up his phone and called Lisa Monroe, an old friend from college, and now a forensic pathologist at the state hospital. Less than 3 hours later, Lisa was in his office, going through the documents with sharp, practiced eyes. She flipped through the pages, frowning. The ink doesn't match official document standards. The formatting's off. And the listed cause of death is sudden cardiac arrest. But there's no history of underlying conditions. Nathaniel, this isn't a legitimate death certificate. At the very least, it wasn't processed properly. You think it might have been forged? Lisa looked up slowly. Not just possible, highly likely. Nathaniel clenched his fist. Everything Lucy had told him the night before was starting to make painful sense. That evening, in a small motel room Nathaniel had rented for Lucy, so she wouldn't sleep on the street, they spoke again. Nathaniel sat on a wooden chair while Lucy curled up on the bed, clutching a worn teddy bear. "I used to hear my mum calling my name," Lucy said quietly. Nathaniel leaned in. "When?" at night, through the basement door. But then it stopped. And Richard told me she went away, that she died. Nathaniel said nothing. He let her talk, every word a jagged piece of a larger puzzle. She spoke of nights locked out by Richard, of sneaking around to search for her mum, of being thrown out the last time she tried to open the basement door. "My mum would never leave me," Lucy said, her eyes glassy but unwavering. "I know she's still alive. I can feel it. Every time I walk past that house, I hear whispers from the ground." "Are you scared?" Lucy shook her head. "Number, because if she's down there, I have to find her." Nathaniel looked out the window. The wind hissed through the cracked frame, bringing with it the chill of late winter. A sudden thought struck him. Pure instinct. The next day, he and Lisa returned to the hospital, where Elena had been declared dead. Most of the records had been archived, but Lisa had clearance to access them. After 3 hours of searching, Lisa returned with an old file. There was no doctor listed as having examined Elena. Instead, a line was highlighted in red. "Confirmed by temporary administrative staff." "We don't do that," Lisa said firmly. "Only licensed physicians can certify a death. Someone pressured a staffer to fake this." Nathaniel stared at the file, his chest tightening. There was no more doubt. A woman had been declared dead, without any valid medical verification. She might never have left that house. And Richard, the man Lucy called her stepfather, was hiding something deadly. "We need to talk to Lucy," Nathaniel said. "Tonight, I'll ask more about the house." Back at the motel, Lucy was waiting, clutching her folder of papers, eyes filled with quiet hope. When Nathaniel told her what Lisa had discovered, Lucy didn't seem surprised. She just nodded gently. "I knew it," she said. Nathaniel asked suddenly, "Was there anyone who lived near your old house? Someone who might have seen something strange?" Lucy hesitated, then nodded. "There was a boy named Tommy. He used to live in the park near our house. He once saw Richard carrying something, like a wooden box, into the basement at night. He got scared, never told anyone." Nathaniel exchanged a look with Lisa. "We need to find that boy," Lisa said. That night, Nathaniel quietly sent an email to an old contact inside local law enforcement, a private investigator named Dean Holloway. In it, he wrote, "I need to quietly investigate a possible missing person and suspected faked death. Involves a man named Richard Black. I believe someone may be illegally held inside that house." What once felt like scattered fragments was now forming a clear picture. Elena might never have left that house, and if she was still alive, Lucy might be the only one who never stopped believing it. "Are you ready to go back to that house?" Nathaniel asked. Lucy looked straight into his eyes. "If my mum is down there, I'll go back, even if it's on fire." 3 days after that conversation, Nathaniel returned to the neighborhood where Elena had once lived. The narrow road leading to the old house was as dusty and quiet as ever. This time, he brought Lucy along, hoping to speak to the neighbors, people who once lived beside Elena and Richard. Lucy gripped his hand tightly, her face tense. The old house loomed ahead like a ghost, same high fences, same dark windows. An elderly woman selling fruit outside gave them a cautious look, but nodded when Nathaniel asked about Elena. "I remember her. She was kind. But after she married that new husband, nobody saw her again. Heard she had heart trouble and passed." "Did you ever see an ambulance? A funeral?" Nathaniel pressed gently. "No." "That's the strange part. But that Richard fellow said he had her buried elsewhere, and no one dared question him," she added in a low voice. The trail seemed to go cold. Everything Lucy believed might be true, but the proof was scattered like fragments of a dream. For Lucy, each step closer to that house brought memories crashing down. She stood silently before the iron gate, hands trembling, her eyes locked on the basement window, the one she had been dragged past in fear. She could still hear the muffled sounds, the cries from below. But memories weren't evidence. On the way back, Nathaniel took Lucy to a small diner. They sat by the window, warm yellow light casting soft shadows across her face. And in that moment, Nathaniel saw it clearly. Lucy had Elena's eyes, the same quiet strength, the same way of listening, the same unspoken resilience. She was her mother's mirror. "Lucy," Nathaniel said softly, "would you like to know how I met your mum?" She nodded. "Back when we were kids, we were neighbors. She was the only one who ever stood up for me when I was bullied. She used to sing while watering her flowers. One day, she just disappeared. No one knew why. I searched, but it was too late." Lucy was quiet for a long moment, then asked in a whisper, "Now you've found me. Does that mean we're close to finding her too?" Nathaniel nodded, but inside, he couldn't shake the weight pressing on his chest. Every clue was vague. Everything was instinct. No solid proof. On the ride back, he stared out the car window, a question gnawing at him. Am I chasing a ghost? Or is this child the only one brave enough to believe what's real? As they stepped out of the diner, a soft drizzle began to fall. Nathaniel gently pulled Lucy close. "We haven't found the truth yet, but we've found each other, and if she's not giving up, then neither can I." The fading documents and the words of a child might not be enough to convince the world, but they were enough to light a spark of doubt. Nathaniel was now on a mission for the truth, and as neighbors slowly began to admit what they'd once ignored, a buried past was rising to the surface. He couldn't sleep that night. The photograph, Lucy's stories, and the tangled folder burned in his thoughts. He walked to the window and stared into the silent darkness beyond. Every whisper, every faded lead, pointed to one place, the old house where Eleanor once lived. A week later, Nathaniel brought Lucy back to that same neighborhood. The narrow street leading to the row of old houses was thick with the dust of time. The sky was overcast, heavy and gray, mirroring the mood in the car. Lucy sat silently beside him, clutching her worn teddy bear and the old folder of documents tightly. When they stopped in front of house number 43, the house where Elena once lived with Richard, it looked just as it had before. Lucy said nothing, but her eyes tensed, as if preparing to face a nightmare that had never ended. And sadly, this time was no different. The neighbors gave them the same rehearsed answers. "We heard Elena died of heart issues. Richard said she was buried somewhere else. Nobody saw anything unusual." But Nathaniel was beginning to understand. They all knew something, but had chosen silence. As if the truth had been buried not just by Richard, but by the complicit quiet of everyone around them. Lucy stayed silent the whole ride back, but just before they reached the motel, she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I used to hear knocking from the basement, like someone was trying to call for help, but Richard always kept it locked." Nathaniel turned toward her. There was no physical proof, but the consistency in Lucy's memories and her unwavering instincts were impossible to ignore. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and said quietly, "You're not crazy. You're not imagining this. If you're still hearing something, then we need to go down there." That afternoon, they went to the park where Lucy used to sleep. On a worn stone bench near an empty lot sat a thin boy with scruffy brown hair, playing with a crumpled snack wrapper. "Tommy." Lucy walked over and called softly, "Tommy." He flinched. Recognizing her, Tommy stood up, about to walk away, but Nathaniel gently stepped in. "I'm not here to force you to say anything. I just want to listen, if there's something you need to say." Tommy glanced around, his face smudged with dirt, his hands trembling, lips pressed tight. Lucy stepped closer and took his hand. "Tommy, you don't have to be scared anymore. We have Mr. Nathaniel. He's kind. We just need the truth." Tommy kept his head down, mouth moving, but no words coming out. Nathaniel crouched down beside him, voice calm and patient. "I know you saw something. Maybe someone told you to keep it quiet, but if you speak up today, you could help save someone. Someone who's been hidden for a very long time." Lucy's eyes glistened, but shone with determination. "You're the only one who saw it, and I believe you." There was a long pause. Then Tommy looked up, but he only shook his head and ran off, disappearing into the distance. That night, in the quiet of his apartment, Nathaniel sat alone at the wooden table. A blank sheet of paper lay before him, dampened by steam from a forgotten cup of tea. Outside, the wind howled, carrying pieces of memory with it. He thought of Elena, the girl who once sat beside him in art class, the first to take his hand when others pushed him down, the girl who scratched his name into an old pencil box with crooked letters, the one he never had the courage to confess to. When she suddenly moved away, all he kept was a single photo, the last one they ever took together. He thought time had buried her memory, until Lucy appeared. Every time she looked up, every time she said, "I believe my mum is alive," he didn't just see a stubborn child. He saw Elena, the same fire in her eyes, the same quiet strength. That kind of belief couldn't be faked. He knew now what Lucy was saying wasn't just childish hope, but all they had were fragments, a few words from a scared boy, neighbors who looked away, an old photo, and gut instinct. Nathaniel sighed and clenched his fists. The clues were still scattered and fragile, but he couldn't give up, because Lucy hadn't. A child who had never been taught how to live was now teaching him how not to quit, and he made himself a promise. If Elena is still alive, then he, the man who once lost her, wouldn't let history repeat itself. 2 months passed, a relentless journey through fog and doubt. While Nathaniel's friends juggled stocks and real estate deals, he, a millionaire, was buried in dust-covered public records, run-down neighborhoods, and hospital archives, chasing scraps of a truth that only a 10-year-old girl still believed in. Lucy now lived at Nathaniel's home, in a small attic room he had cleaned, carpeted, and painted in a soft, calming blue. But every night, while the city slept, she dreamed of her mother's voice calling her name from somewhere deep and dark. She would jolt awake, crying, whispering the same thing over and over. "Mom's not dead. They're lying to us." During the day, Lucy didn't stay still. She slipped away from Nathaniel's watch, wandering into the flower shop on the corner, where Eleanor used to buy white daisies every week. She visited the old fabric store, the tiny neighborhood grocery. The thin little girl with the fierce eyes kept asking the same question. "Have you seen my mum? She's not dead. She's still out there." People felt pity. They gave her sad looks, and eventually they offered gentle words of dismissal. "You have to move on, sweetheart," the florist said, patting her head. "When grown-ups die, they don't come back. You have to keep living." But Lucy refused to accept that. She walked away quietly. No tears, just a numbness behind her eyes, hardened by hearing, "She's gone," one too many times. On a grey Sunday morning, Nathaniel took Lucy to the cemetery where Eleanor was supposedly buried. The wild grass had turned golden with the season. Lucy stood in silence for a long time, staring at the weathered stone. Then she said, out of nowhere, "My mum isn't under here. She's not buried here." Nathaniel was adjusting the flowers on the grave when a furious voice tore through the air behind them. "You've got some nerve coming back here, you little demon." Richard. He appeared like a beast from the underworld, reeking of alcohol, consumed by rage. His face was red, eyes burning, shirt wrinkled and stained, sleeves rolled up, and in his hand, the old lighter he always carried, a reminder of long, dark nights. "You're back at this fake grave again, crying like she's still alive. She's dead. I handled everything. I buried her proper. Stop digging up the past." Before Nathaniel could react, Richard shoved Lucy hard. She fell onto the damp ground, her head striking a protruding stone. Pain shot through her skull. But worse than the physical blow were his words. "You're a mistake. No father, no mother. I should have gotten rid of you the day you stepped into my house." His hand flew up, ready to strike again. But it stopped, midair. Nathaniel had grabbed his wrist. Firm, final. He stood tall, eyes no longer calm. Now a storm. "You were about to hit a child in front of her mother's grave," Nathaniel growled, voice low and steady. Richard yanked his arm back and barked, "Who the hell are you?" "You think you're something special, letting that stray cling to you like a mangy dog, whining, begging. You think she's not playing you, you idiot?" Nathaniel said nothing. He simply looked at Richard, and then, without warning, punched him hard across the face. Blood burst from Richard's nose, but he laughed bitterly, smug. "I've got lawyers. I've got my mother. I've got the death certificate. What the hell do you have?" Nathaniel stepped closer, his voice like iron. "I have the truth. And I have this girl. As of today, I'm Lucy Carter's legal guardian. You have no claim to her. Not anymore." Richard went silent. He hadn't expected this. He wiped the blood from his nose, scoffed, spat onto the grass, and walked off, leaving behind a foul stench of rage and fear. Silence returned to the cemetery. But inside Nathaniel, the fire of suspicion roared louder than ever. As he helped Lucy to her feet, she gripped his hand tightly, not from pain, but from trust. Then they heard a soft rustle. Nathaniel turned. Behind the bushes, a small figure was hiding. Tommy. The boy froze, like a startled animal. His eyes were wide with panic, body trembling, fingers curled tightly around his tattered shirt. Lucy called out, clear and urgent. "Tommy! It's me. Lucy, don't run." He stopped, didn't turn around, but didn't flee either. Nathaniel stepped forward, carefully, his voice calm and warm. "You saw what happened just now. You've seen what Lucy's gone through. If you're carrying something heavy inside, you don't have to carry it alone anymore." He knelt to meet Tommy's eye level. "There are things adults try to hide, but if you're brave enough to speak the truth, you could save a life, really." Tommy finally turned. His eyes met Lucy's. She looked back, soft, honest, without blame, like a thread pulling him from the dark. And then, like a door finally unlocking, he nodded. Later, inside a cozy bakery at the end of the street, beneath warm amber lights, Nathaniel sat between Lucy and Tommy. On the table, he placed an old photo of 3 children, himself, Elena, and another friend, taken decades ago. "I used to be very close to your mum," he said. "I lost her once, but I won't let anyone else be lost again." Lucy didn't speak. She just smiled. It was the first real smile Nathaniel had seen from her, and it pierced straight through his heart, because it was Elena's smile. Tommy looked up and spoke, his voice trembling. "One night, I saw Mr. Richard dragging a big wooden box down to the basement. It looked heavy. I was hiding in the bushes watching. Then I heard something real quiet, like someone crying. A woman's voice calling someone's name. Lucy." The room went still. Each word hit like a blade. Nathaniel clenched his fists, then nodded slowly. "You did great, Tommy. I'm proud of you. Lucy turned to her friend, her eyes sparkling. But this time, they didn't shine with pain. They shone with hope. Real hope. For the first time, Lucy carried more than just belief. She had her first piece of real evidence, enough to start unearthing a decade of lies. Nathaniel said nothing, but inside him, a storm was raging. Tommy's words had cracked open the final wall in Nathaniel's restraint. He no longer doubted. Richard's family, the abusive man and the polished, manipulative mother who stood behind him, they were hiding something monstrous. A woman declared dead, a child dismissed as delusional, a neighborhood that chose silence over truth. Fury boiled in Nathaniel's chest, but his hands stayed calm on the table. His face remained still. Only his eyes, cold, sharp, relentless, betrayed the fire within. He would find Elena, alive or not. And he would bring the truth into the light, even if it meant dragging an entire corrupt legacy out of the shadows. When Tommy's confession ignited the last spark of doubt, Nathaniel knew it was time to step into the most dangerous place of all, the house where every clue pointed. And to do that, he needed the law on his side. A new chapter had begun, one where the unwavering belief of a brave little girl would stand toe-to-toe with a cold, calculated system of lies. That morning, Nathaniel walked slowly along the stone path leading to Richard Black's estate. He wasn't alone. Beside him stood Doctor Lisa Monroe, Lucy, and Detective Eric Bowman, the officer who had just signed a search warrant after reviewing all the new evidence. Detective Bowman, a stern-faced man in his 50s, wore a long coat and held a thick file. He was here not to speculate, but to witness firsthand whether the truth had indeed been buried, just as Nathaniel had claimed. The door to the mansion opened. Gloria Black, Richard's mother, stepped out. Her eyes darkened as she spotted Lucy and the detective. "What are you people doing here?" she hissed. "Dragging that crazy girl around to destroy my house again." Lucy remained silent. Nathaniel stepped forward, firm and clear. "We're here with a legal search warrant, presented by Detective Bowman himself. This is no longer speculation. This is a formal investigation." Lisa opened a folder, revealing official documents. A forged death certificate, missing hospital records, and most damning of all, DNA results, proving the remains in the grave did not belong to Elena. Detective Bowman looked Gloria in the eyes, his voice cold. "Mrs. Gloria Black, I ask that you cooperate. Everything will proceed by legal protocol." Gloria paled slightly, but kept her composure. "That must be some hospital error. Elena's dead. I handled the burial myself. You can't pin this on me." Nathaniel leaned forward, voice sharp. "And who signed the payment to Dr. Marvin Gray, the physician whose license was revoked for forging medical documents? You also hired him to certify Elena as mentally unstable, didn't you?" Lisa handed over another set of papers. Her tone was crisp. "These documents aren't just legally invalid. They're part of an orchestrated cover-up." Gloria said nothing. Her eyes darted, hands clenching her dress. Before she could speak, Nathaniel added, "I met with Detective Bowman." That meeting had taken place a month ago. Back then, all Nathaniel had were Lucy's memories, blurry photocopies, and a hope too fragile to stand on its own. Bowman, a pragmatic man who had worked dozens of false identity cases, hadn't held back. "You're letting emotion cloud your judgment. Kids imagine anything to escape grief. Without real proof, there's nothing I can do." But this time, Nathaniel returned with everything. DNA test results, bank receipts, forged signatures, and a photo of young Elena next to Lucy. He didn't plead. He simply said, "I already lost a family. I won't let Lucy lose her mother." Bowman had looked at Lucy, sitting quietly outside the office. Her eyes said more than any file ever could. With a heavy sigh, Bowman signed the warrant, with a single decisive stroke. Richard wasn't home when the team arrived. Gloria shouted, calling Lucy insane, a liar, a troublemaker. But Lucy looked at her, calm, unshaken. This wasn't the gaze of a frightened little girl. It was the gaze of someone who had crawled up from the bottom of the abyss and chosen the light. The search took hours, and in the basement, behind a large wine shelf, they found it. A freshly bricked-up wall. A drill roared to life. Brick by brick fell away, revealing a sealed concrete door. The air turned damp and metallic, filled with mildew, antiseptic, and something unmistakably human. As the door creaked open, a cold, moist gust hit their faces. Flashlights swept across the stained walls. Inside was a small, windowless room. No light, no warmth, just a narrow air vent near the ceiling. Nathaniel entered first, flashlight scanning the corners. Lisa and Bowman followed, silent and tense. Lucy remained at the doorway, eyes scanning the walls. Then she tilted her head and stepped toward the right wall, near the cold stone floor. "Mr. Nathaniel," she whispered, voice trembling. I hear something. It's like tapping." Everyone froze. They pressed their ears close. A faint sound emerged, like fingernails scratching the wall. Tap, tap, soft. Paused. Then again. Lucy leaned in, whispering, "Mum? Are you there? It's me, Lucy." The tapping stopped. Then came a new rhythm, faster, desperate, replying to the voice it had waited years to hear. Nathaniel turned and shouted, "Keep drilling!" Each blow of the drill felt like it pierced their ribs. Dust flew. Then, a crack of light broke through the wall. They removed the last chunk of concrete. And there she was, Elena, curled in a corner, skin clinging to bones, her clothes tattered and grey. The stench of rot and time filled the air. The flashlight beam hit her face. Her eyes slowly opened. For the first time in nearly 5 years, Elena saw light. No sky, no voices, no life. All she had heard for years was her own heartbeat. Silver strands clung to her scalp like wire. Her fingernails were cracked, bloodied, and worn down from clawing the walls, over and over, just to write one thing. "Lucy, I'm here." She didn't scream. She simply raised a hand and whispered, "Lucy, my baby." The walls bore hundreds of scratched messages. "Lucy, I'm alive. Lucy, I'm here." Lucy broke down, sobbing. She rushed forward, throwing herself into her mother's arms. "Mom, I'm here. I found you." Eleanor shook violently, clinging to her child, and though her body trembled from weakness, her eyes burned with one thing: love that never died. Lisa collapsed to her knees. Nathaniel turned away, his eyes wet, fists clenched tight. No one spoke. They didn't need to, because everyone in that room knew what they had just witnessed wasn't a miracle. It was proof of pain beyond imagination. Can you imagine? Nearly 5 years in a concrete prison. No sunlight, no sound, just darkness, fear, and the fading hope that someone still remembered you. Who would you be if it were you? Would you survive like Elena did? Tell us. Comment below. We want to hear your thoughts. So what kept Elena alive all those years? In truth, not her body, not even food, but the fury and love of a mother who refused to die. Richard didn't just lock her away. He came down often, especially at night. Sometimes, when the house was silent, he'd open the door and unleash his fury, beating her, mocking her, using her as his personal punching bag. But he didn't kill her. No, he wanted her to live in agony, to breathe with pain, to remember him with every breath. Whenever she passed out, Richard would pour water on her face, shove food into her mouth, force her to swallow. "You don't get to die," he'd snarl. "You get to remember every single day." He threatened her with Lucy. "You want your kid to stay safe? Then shut your mouth. One scream, and she disappears just like you did. Elena didn't survive because she could. She survived because she had to. Because if she died, Lucy would be truly orphaned. In every way. Richard knew. Killing Elena made him a suspect, but hiding her, like a doll in a wall, meant no body, no proof, just silence. The room was soundproofed, double steel doors, a small air vent for food trays. An elderly housekeeper, hired by Gloria, delivered the meals, warned never to ask questions. If she did, she was threatened. Stay quiet, or your family pays. Gloria told everyone Elena had postpartum psychosis. She whispered to neighbors that her daughter-in-law was in a private facility. Any noises, any shadows near the basement were dismissed with a smile. Oh, we just have a strange old dog. The neighbors, bought with money or silenced by fear, looked the other way. They knew. But they chose willful blindness. Elena wasn't just declared dead, she was buried alive, in every sense. The truth is out. But what remains are the shattered pieces. A mother robbed of light for years, a child who grew up with wounds instead of answers, and a society that let silence become an accomplice. If not for Lucy, if not for her relentless, unshakable faith, Elena would still be behind that wall, not buried in earth, but buried in lies. The truth has been unearthed, literally. But the light that flickered into that basement isn't enough. Now justice must speak. And for that to happen, Lucy, Elena, and Nathaniel, the ones who made it out, must rise, for themselves, and for everyone who has stayed silent for far too long. The case spread quickly. Richard Black was arrested that very afternoon. He wore his usual cold expression, eyes sharp with contempt and arrogance. At the police station, Richard stubbornly denied everything. He claimed he had only tried to protect his family from an unstable wife, calling the entire case a fabricated plot to destroy his reputation. But lies no longer had room to breathe. The investigation expanded, with testimony and evidence that was impossible to ignore. Elena, after receiving urgent medical care, recovered enough to testify. Her voice was calm, cold as steel, as she recounted in chilling detail the years she spent locked away, beaten, and stripped of her dignity. She didn't scream. She just told the truth. The elderly housekeeper, once hired by Gloria to pass food through the vent, stood before the court in tears. I knew someone was in there, but I was threatened. They said if I spoke, my whole family would suffer. Neighbors who had heard strange noises or glimpsed shadows through the basement window also came forward. Some couldn't meet Lucy's eyes as they took the stand. But they finally admitted what they had long chosen to ignore. Tommy, in his faded shirt and trembling voice, stood before the court. I saw Mr. Richard carry something, like a coffin, into the basement. I heard crying, but I was too scared. Dr. Lisa Monroe presented forensic files, DNA test results, and legal documents proving the declaration of Eleanor's death had been entirely fabricated. Everything matched. Nathaniel took the stand and described the journey. Each step, each rejection, each dismissive glance. And the one reason he refused to quit. Because a little girl never stopped believing her mother was alive. I believed her. And she was right. And finally, Lucy. Just 10 years old, she stepped up to the witness stand without a single tear. She looked directly at Richard and Gloria and said, I'm not afraid of adults anymore, and I'm not alone. The entire courtroom fell silent. Eleanor stood next, fragile, still weak, but her eyes burned with fire, not just from the years of darkness, but from the rage of injustice long suppressed. She had been more than imprisoned. She had been erased, beaten, humiliated, reduced to a ghost, but nothing cut deeper than hearing Richard use Lucy as a weapon. Want your daughter to live in peace? Then stay quiet, be a walking corpse. Now, standing in the light, Eleanor refused to be just a victim. She would be a voice, a blade of truth. I stayed silent out of fear, but today, I speak for every mother forced into silence, silenced by laws, by reputations, by money, and by apathy. No one should survive on the back of someone else's pain. After days of testimony, the court reached a verdict. As the judge read the sentence, the room held its breath. All eyes turned to the Black family, not out of curiosity, but with righteous, silent fury. Gloria, stripped of her once polished facade, now trembled. Her face pale, tears running, but no one pitied her. Richard, stiff in his seat, clenched his fists so tight they turned purple. He no longer cried innocence. He just sat and listened. To the final toll of the bell, ending his empire of power and deceit. The courtroom gallery, Eleanor's relatives, Angela's family, even strangers, remained silent. But their silence was loud with truth. Justice wasn't just for one woman. It was for everyone who had suffered in silence. Verdict: Richard Black, unlawful imprisonment, organized abuse, falsifying legal documents, witness intimidation, and second-degree manslaughter, with later amendments. Sentence: life without parole. Gloria Black, concealing criminal activity, document forgery, witness threats, and inciting domestic abuse. Sentence: 25 years in prison. Attorney Marvin Gray, once a celebrated legal tactician, was the hidden force behind Richard. Though he never raised a hand, he signed off on false psychiatric records, drafted the fake death certificate, and accepted illicit funds from Richard under the guise of consulting fees. With his financial background, Nathaniel traced the full chain of money laundering, every legal service actually a bribe for silence. Marvin didn't just aid a criminal, he helped legitimize an atrocity. He was disbarred, charged with legal fraud, bribery, and conspiracy. Sentence: 12 years in federal prison, no parole. Witnesses received full protection and trauma support. Just when it seemed everything had ended, Dr. Lisa Monroe stepped forward with a final piece of evidence. Holding a new forensic report, she spoke. The body buried in Elena's grave wasn't Elena. It was another young woman. Cross-referenced with cold cases and missing persons reports, the team identified her as Angela Ramirez, 19 years old, missing for 5 years. Records revealed Angela had once clashed with Richard during a shift at a bar he frequented. A blurry surveillance clip confirmed a heated altercation the night she disappeared. In a drunken rage, Richard had killed Angela, hid her body, and planted it in Elena's fake grave, faking a burial to protect his lie. With this new evidence, the court added charges: second-degree murder evidence, tampering legal fraud. The life sentence was upheld, and a new investigation into Angela's case was opened, finally granting justice to a family who had waited years for an answer. A hush fell over the courtroom. Angela's mother, her hair now grey, her hands weathered by time, sobbed in a police officer's embrace. Through tears, she whispered, "She has a name again. My daughter has a name. Do you know someone like Angela? Like Elena? Like Lucy? If you do, don't stay silent, because the truth is always waiting for someone brave enough to speak it." The courthouse doors closed behind them. Elena stepped into the sunlight, her face still tight with exhaustion. Relief, weariness, emotion. Everything churned inside her. She had spoken. She had stood. She had reclaimed her voice. But no court ruling could erase the years of captivity, the trauma, the darkness. Lucy, though, was different. Her eyes sparkled like sunlight after a storm. She ran ahead, clutching her mother's hand, then turned to look at Nathaniel with joy. She had been right. Her mother had never left her. On the way home, Nathaniel drove past familiar streets. He shared everything with Elena, from the first time he met Lucy to every step they took together to uncover the truth. Each moment felt like a puzzle piece Elena never imagined would come together. "Lucy is brave," Nathaniel said, glancing at her reflection in the rearview mirror. "She never gave up. Even when people called her delusional, she believed you were alive. Do you know why? Because she has your heart." Back at the house, Nathaniel helped Eleanor out of the car. She was still weak. Every step was fragile. Her skin pale, her body thin, her hands trembling beneath a fresh sweater. Lucy rushed over with warm slippers and gently tucked a blanket over her mother's feet. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. That night, over bowls of hot chicken soup, the three of them had dinner together for the first time. Lucy laughed brightly, talking about her drawing class. Nathaniel snuck extra food into Eleanor's bowl. She ate slowly, eyes glistening, not from the onions, but from a feeling long forgotten. The warmth of home. After dinner, Lucy colored quietly in the living room. Eleanor and Nathaniel sat at the table, hands clasped around warm mugs of tea. Elena folded her hands in her lap, trying to hold on to the peace. "I had a family once," Nathaniel said quietly. "My wife and daughter died in a car crash 3 years ago. Since then, I stopped letting anyone get close, until I met Lucy." He pulled out a small, aged photo. Him and Elena, back in high school. She was smiling brightly. He looked red-faced and awkward. "Elena, I wrote you so many letters back then, but I never sent them. Then you moved away, and I thought I'd lost my chance." Elena bit her lip. Her eyes were red. "I had feelings for you too, but something happened in my family. We had to leave overnight. I never got to say goodbye. And then, everything just drifted away." There was a long pause. Nathaniel took a deep breath, looked her in the eyes. "You've been through hell, but you didn't let it destroy you. You fought. You lived. For your daughter. If you'll let me, I'd like to be Lucy's father, and if you'll allow it, I'd like to call you my wife." Elena laughed through tears. "Are you sure? I was a failed wife, a mother who couldn't protect her child." "No," he said, holding her hand tightly. "You're a mother who survived hell, and the woman I never stopped loving. I had a family. I'll always love them. But Lucy, she's like a miracle. When I look at her, I don't just see the past. I see hope. You and Lucy. You're not a replacement. You're something new, and I want to protect it for the rest of my life." Neither of them noticed Lucy had been standing in the doorway, bathed in the soft glow of the kitchen light. She stepped forward, clutching her coloring book to her chest. There was a breathless silence. Then came her voice, clear and bright. "Dad." Her voice rang like a bell in a quiet sky. No hesitation, no fear. "Can I call you Dad now?" Nathaniel froze. His heart pounded. Eyes wet, he opened his arms. Lucy ran into them, holding on so tightly, it felt like she never wanted to let go. He wrapped his arms around her, voice shaking. "I've always been here, Lucy, and I'll never leave you again." A quiet filled the room, but it was the quiet of peace. Elena watched from her chair. Her hands trembled, her eyes overflowing, but not from pain, from life, from watching her daughter call someone Dad, a man she never dared dream of. She choked up, then smiled gently. "So, when did you two start calling each other that?" Lucy blushed and whispered proudly, "He said I could, but today's the first time I really felt like I had a dad." Eleanor turned to Nathaniel. He nodded softly, and on her lips formed a smile, her first true smile in years. And then they all laughed, all three. The kind of laughter that heals, that warms. It wasn't loud, it wasn't showy, but it was pure. That night, rain misted outside the windows, wind whispered through the cracks. But inside that small home, three souls, once lost, once broken, had finally found their way to one another. They weren't just survivors. They were now what they had always deserved to be, a family. Do you believe it's possible for a broken past to give rise to a beautiful future? That the most wounded hearts can heal one another? If you're carrying pain, know this: somewhere, a Lucy is finding the light, an Elena is rising, and a Nathaniel is opening his arms. This family was reborn, not just because they escaped the dark, but because they chose to share the light. Lucy is no longer alone. She is hope. Eleanor is no longer a victim. She is a healer. Nathaniel isn't just a rescuer. He's home. And what they've built together may one day be the shelter for 1,000 others still waiting in the dark. Months after the trial, the name Lucy Carter no longer belonged to a homeless child standing outside a bakery. She had become a symbol of inspiration for millions of forgotten children. Lucy's journey wasn't just about solving a case. It was a wake-up call that a brave child, armed with unshakable faith, could save a life and change the world. Eleanor, though her health remained fragile, gradually recovered. She underwent regular therapy and participated in support forums for women who had survived abuse. There she shared her story, not as a victim, but as a survivor. A mother who had walked through hell and returned, trembling but unbowed. Nathaniel, after completing the legal process, officially adopted Lucy. At the public press conference, he spoke before dozens of cameras flashing. 3 years ago, I lost my wife and daughter in an accident. I thought my life ended with them. But then I met Lucy, a small girl with a great heart. She saved her mother, and she saved me. So today, I'm not here to celebrate a victory, but to say I will hold on to them, the people I love, for the rest of my life. Millions were moved. Social media flooded with messages of support. The hashtag #Lucy Still Believes trended globally. Meanwhile, Gloria died alone in a correctional facility. No visitors, no flowers. She had chosen cruelty and died surrounded by the very coldness she had created. Attorney Marvin Gray was permanently disbarred. His 12-year sentence stripped him of everything. As for Richard Black, the man who once held power and wealth, he now lived out his days with a life sentence behind bars, eyes hollow. Not long after, the Grace Foundation was established. Nathaniel was its founder, Lucy its honorary ambassador. The foundation offered legal aid and protection for children and abused women under the motto, "No one left in the dark." At the foundation's launch, Lucy, now stronger and more composed than ever, stood on stage, looking into the eyes of hundreds of attendees and millions of viewers watching live. They once said my mum was dead, but she lived, and that changed everything. No one has the right to extinguish a child's hope. No one has the right to stay silent in the face of injustice. If I, a 10-year-old girl, could believe, then anyone can. The entire room stood in thunderous applause. A story that once brought a nation to tears had now become a new beginning, a spark of change. In a quiet corner of the city, nestled in a blooming garden, Elena tended to white chrysanthemums. Her hands still bore scars, but every time she brushed dust from the petals, her touch was gentle and full of patience. Lucy ran around the yard, watering flowers, her laughter echoing across the sky. Nathaniel sat under the porch, polishing a photo frame on a wooden table. The picture wasn't of him, Elena, or Lucy. It was an old photo of his late wife and daughter. Elena approached from behind, gently took a soft cloth, and wiped the frame once more. She didn't say much, just placed a hand softly on Nathaniel's shoulder. "I still clean this photo every morning," she whispered, "because I know they are a part of your heart you'll never let go." Nathaniel smiled. "And you, and Lucy, are the part I never thought I'd get to have again." The three of them, three once broken souls, sat together on a calm, windless afternoon. Steam curled from their tea. Flowers swayed. On the table were 3 cups, one for him, one for her, and one for the child who changed everything. A family. Do you believe that in the midst of the deepest pain, something beautiful can grow? That after the longest night, a sliver of light can still shine, if someone just dares to believe? Early morning sunlight streamed through the small kitchen window. The air was filled with the scent of toasted bread and strawberry jam Elena had just made. Lucy sat on a high stool, legs swinging, eyes glowing as she read a new book. Nathaniel brewed coffee, watching his wife and daughter, moments more precious than anything he'd ever owned. Life had returned. But not as it was. It had started an entirely new chapter. Eleanor continued weekly therapy sessions. The nightmares still came, but now she didn't face them alone. Whenever she awoke, drenched in sweat, she only had to turn and see Nathaniel sitting beside her, hand in hand, his gaze steady. Lucy had a new routine. Each night, she'd crawl into her mother's room, hug her, and whisper, "Don't be afraid, I'm here." The once worn house had been repainted a soft ivory. Elena planted flowers on the porch, and Lucy hung her own drawings all along the hallway. In the living room, next to a wedding photo of Elena and Nathaniel, hung a special frame, a picture of the 3 of them, stitched with the words, "We found each other." One autumn afternoon, Lucy asked, "Mum, why do our daisies keep blooming?" Eleanor smiled. "Because someone takes care of them every day, sweetheart. Flowers, like hearts, keep blooming when they're loved." Nathaniel approached, wrapping his arms around both of them. And when someone believes in them, those flowers never die. At the Grace Foundation, Lucy continued to visit every weekend. She began reading letters from children who had been abandoned, abused, or forgotten. She replied with her own voice, simple, warm, and sincere. "I understand. I used to feel that way. But then I found my mum, and I found someone I could call Dad." She didn't just write. She recorded voice messages, gentle wishes, hopeful stories for special children's radio segments. One day, she made a short video reading from her old journal. "Tonight, I heard my mom's voice. I don't know if it was real, but I won't stop believing. Even if I'm alone, I'll keep looking for her." The video went viral. Child welfare groups shared it widely. A school in another state created a reading corner called Lucy's Corner, a space where kids could write letters and messages of hope and learn to listen to their own hearts. A team of young lawyers contacted the Grace Foundation, offering pro bono protection for children facing legal abuse. Elena started teaching flower arrangement and healing journaling classes. But they weren't just classes. They were sanctuaries. Women came to cry, to share, or simply to sit in silence. Elena didn't lecture. She simply sat beside them, wrote with them, and sometimes placed a single wildflower in the hands of someone who came late. She often said, "I once lived in a room with no way out, but memories of my daughter kept me alive. If I, at my weakest, could rise again, then so can you." One woman, once locked in a basement by her husband for 2 months, arrived at Elena's class with swollen wrists. 6 months later, she became a Grace Foundation volunteer. People began calling Elena the one who touches broken souls without making them bleed more. Nathaniel declined every award and recognition. Most of his company's profits were funneled quietly into the foundation. He worked behind the scenes on legal aid cases, silently supporting families with children in crisis. When asked why he did so much, he simply said, "Some wounds only heal when we stop counting praise and start taking action. This is how I repay the debt life once took from me." One winter night, the three of them sat watching Lucy's speech from the Grace Foundation launch. Her words echoed through the quiet house. No microphone, no spotlight needed. "My mum is alive," and that changed everything. Elena teared up, while Nathaniel took both her and Lucy's hands. "What is family?" Lucy asked. Elena stroked her daughter's hair. "It's the place your heart always comes home to." Outside, snow began to fall gently. Condensation blurred the windows. Lucy drew a heart on the glass with her small finger. A moment later, she snuggled into her father's chest and whispered, "Dad, can we bake cookies tomorrow?" Like the first night we had dinner together. Nathaniel nodded. "I think that's the best idea I've heard all day." Their story, from darkness to light, wasn't just a search for truth. It was the rebirth of life's most beautiful things: faith, love, and courage. Are you still following Lucy's story? Who are you among them? An Elena who once broke, a small but fierce Lucy, a Nathaniel who lost everything, then found hope again. Whoever you are, believe this. You can rewrite your ending, because happiness doesn't arrive early, but it does arrive, if we're brave enough to wait for it. And when it comes, you'll understand. You don't have to be perfect to be loved. You just need to be real enough, not to leave each other, especially on the darkest days. Years passed, but the light they had kindled never dimmed. Lucy grew up strong and steady, like a tree that had survived a storm. Nathaniel and Elena remained a safe haven for lost children, and the story, once thought to be over, continued through life, through love, and through a future everyone deserves. Now 17, Lucy was no longer the trembling child holding a tattered file outside a bakery. She rose early every morning to jog around the neighborhood, brewed tea for her mother, and prepared breakfast for her dad. She excelled in both literature and math, joined the debate club, and volunteered to teach younger students how to write legal letters. Everything about her, her posture, her tone, the way she cared for others, radiated strength. Some nights, she sat by the window, remembering the old basement room, her mother's cries in the dark, and how people once dismissed her as delusional. She often wondered, if I hadn't spoken up that day, would Mum still be here? But every time she remembered, she clenched her fist, a silent affirmation that pain had forged an unbreakable heart. Grace Foundation had grown beyond anyone's expectations. Once a small office, it was now a fully fledged community center with branches in multiple states. Hundreds of women and children were rescued, placed in safe shelters, given therapy, and allowed to begin again, thanks to a girl named Lucy. One late June afternoon, the center held an anniversary celebration. It wasn't fancy, just a garden filled with flowers and handwritten signs from those who had been helped. Thank you for hearing me. Thank you for not leaving me behind. Because of you, I smile again. Lucy stood on a small stage. Her hair was a bit longer now, her eyes just as bright. She held the mic, voice steady. Years ago, I was just a girl who'd lost her mum. I didn't know anything about laws or justice, but I had faith, and I met people who believed with me. Because of that, my mother was saved. And now, I want to say this to anyone still in the dark. Keep believing. Even if you're alone, keep believing. Because the light is waiting for you. The audience fell silent in awe. Elena sat in the front row, her hand tightly in Nathaniel's. She watched her daughter, no longer the little girl, but a young woman with purpose and grace. Her eyes filled with tears. Elena looked healthier, more radiant, her hair neatly trimmed, her skin glowing. She smiled more, baked often, tended to the garden, and hand-wrote letters to women in therapy. Though her scars never vanished, she lived each day with gratitude for the miracle she'd been given. That evening, the family returned home. The living room glowed softly under the amber hue of a table lamp. The clock ticked gently on the wall. A steaming pot of tea sat in the center of the table. Lucy read from a textbook, highlighting notes. It was a book on child psychology. She was preparing for a workshop on communication skills for abused children. Elena prepared grilled cheese and egg sandwiches, the first dish she relearned after being rescued. Nathaniel adjusted a crooked picture frame on the wall. He was no longer the silent man he used to be. His face was lighter, more optimistic, often cracking jokes to make his girls laugh. He spent his time gardening, journaling, and hosting gatherings for single fathers at the Grace Foundation. "What are you drawing?" Elena asked gently. Lucy held up her sketch. 3 people holding hands, walking through a field of daisies. It's us, and ahead of us is a house with the lights always on. Elena's eyes welled up. Nathaniel came up from behind and wrapped his arms around them both. Because that light, we created it, Lucy. That night, the 3 of them sat at the oak dining table. Lucy recalled the first time she met Nathaniel outside the bakery. Elena laughed, covering her mouth, eyes shining. Nathaniel looked at the 2 women who changed his life and said slowly, "I still remember." She stood there at the window. Her eyes cut through the night. "I didn't think I'd ever love again. But that look saved me." Elena squeezed his hand. Lucy smiled softly and said, "If you hadn't believed me back then, I don't think I ever would have found Mom." That night, they watched the old video again, of Lucy in court, her tiny eyes unwavering. "I'm not afraid of grown-ups anymore. I'm not alone." Eleanor rested her head on Nathaniel's shoulder. "I survived. But if it weren't for you and Lucy, I'm not sure I'd have become whole again. You and Lucy, you're why I'm still here." No more words were needed. In that small home, the air felt stitched together with threads of healing. None of them were perfect, but they had chosen to stay, with all their pain and all their courage. If you've read this far, perhaps you too have known loss. Maybe you've felt unworthy of love, but believe this, like Lucy, like Elena, like Nathaniel, love isn't something handed out. It's something you hold on to, when you have the strength to stand among the ashes and say, "I still believe." We don't know who you are, where you're from, or how old you are. But if this story touched something in you, please share it. Let it carry the light forward. Because somewhere out there, another Lucy is searching for her mom. Another Eleanor needs a hand to hold. And another Nathaniel is learning how to forgive himself. We wish you peace, not because you've never been hurt, but because you're strong enough not to let the pain define you. Live, love, believe,